My name is James Green, and I am the Francis and Benjamin Benenson Foundation Associate Curator of African Art at the Yale University Art Gallery. I am the curator of the exhibition Bámigbóyè, a master sculptor of the Yoruba tradition, which I began working on in September 2018, when I first came to the gallery. This exhibition is in honor of the work and life of Moshood Olusomo Bámigbóyè. 4 years in the making, I am grateful to all of my colleagues at the gallery, to the artist's family and community, and to the many individuals in lending institutions and in archives who have made this possible. It has truly been an enormous undertaking involving many friends and colleagues in the US, UK, and Nigeria who have been extremely generous with their time and expertise.
Hello, everyone. My name is Effie Igor, and I'll be joining James today on our virtual tour. I currently serve as the Assistant Director of Academic Engagement at the Guggenheim Museum. I'm also a PhD candidate in History and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies at Yale, and I was previously a Wardle Gallery teacher at the Yale University Art Gallery.
Effie, thank you so much for joining me today. And I just want to point out that most importantly, at least for our discussion, you were a contributor to the Bámigbóyè catalogue, which you'll be thrilled to hear is coming out in a matter of days. So thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
Of course, it's so great to be here with you today, James. And it's wonderful to be joined by our online guests. As James mentioned, he will be taking us through the exhibition Bámigbóyè, a master sculptor of the Yoruba tradition. The exhibition opens this Friday, September 9th, 2022, and closes on Sunday, January 8th, 2023. At the Yale University Art Gallery, located in New Haven, Connecticut, James will show us the breadth of Bámigbóyè's work and offer us some insight into his practice. In addition, James will shed light on some of his curatorial choices for the exhibition. The tour will be about 40 minutes, after which we will take questions. The entire presentation should be an hour long. Please use the chat function to let us know of any technical issues and the Q&A panel to ask questions as we move through the exhibition together. We will try to address your questions at the end of our time. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon.
So welcome to Bámigbóyè. As Effie mentioned, I hope that this online presentation will provide a sense of what visiting the exhibition in person is like. In order to illustrate this talk, I am drawing on some beautiful new photographs taken by Jesse Smolensky yesterday morning, which really captured the experience of walking through the show. So on the screen here, you can see the introductory room, where we will now spend a little bit of time orienting ourselves. I just want to point out the title wall. The title was designed by our graphic designer, Chris Chu, who in his font selection was inspired by the verticality of Bámigbóyè's epa masks. And you'll notice how the eye is led down the corridor and into the next room.
It's absolutely gorgeous. So can you start us off by telling us how you conceived of this exhibition? What was your starting point?
Next slide, please. So yes, when I first arrived at Yale in 2018, I was immediately drawn to this work. Who isn't? It has been one of the highlights of the gallery's collection since its succession in 2006 through the bequest of Charles B. Benenson, whose donation of nearly 600 works to the gallery led to the creation of the African Art Department and the establishment of the curatorial position. It is an icon of the gallery's collection, and you can actually see it behind me in a poster from a few years ago. So, likely carved by Bámigbóyè in the 1920s or 1930s, the sculpture depicts a devotee of Oya, wife of the thunder god Shango, riding in state surrounded by her courtiers. It was first shown in the United States in 1976 in an exhibition dedicated to African images of female power, curated by Rosalind Walker, who would go on to organize the first monographic exhibition dedicated to a Yoruba artist at any American museum, Olowo of Ise, a Yoruba sculptor of kings, which was presented at the National Museum of African Art, the Smithsonian Institution in Washington in 1998. Through provenance research, I learned that Benenson acquired this figure through Pace Gallery in New York in 1980, and that it had previously been in the collection of John Freed. By 1980, when Benenson acquired the work, it was attributed to Bámigbóyè of Oda Owa as a result of the scholarship of William Buller Fagg, who had met with this artist on many occasions and who worked closely with Yoruba sculptor Lamidi Fakaye on this identification. Fakaye confirmed that this was likely a sculpture from a shrine dedicated to Oya. So, in developing this exhibition, I started with the question, who is Bámigbóyè of Oda Owa? Can we learn more about him and his workshop? His work had appeared as part of Elisa Lagama's groundbreaking 1997 group exhibition at the Met, Master Hand, Individuality and Creativity Among Yoruba Sculptors, but never had Bámigbóyè been the focus of a monographic presentation.
I absolutely love this work. As you mentioned, the sculpture depicts the priestess of Oya. The priestess is sitting on top of a horse, surrounded by diminutive figures. Twinning is visible throughout the sculpture. The figures that surround the priestess include two couples, one to her left and the other to her right. In addition, two male figures sit with her on the horse, one in front and one behind. The mirroring offers aesthetic balance and symmetry. The imagery embedded in the sculpture would have been deliberately included to attract certain energies as requested by the patron, and also would have acted as an acknowledgement of the role of the patron within the community. I used to show local New Haven students this work, particularly grade 3 students, when they came into the gallery. During our time together, we would meditate on the theme of power when looking at this object. Not only is this work a celebration of female power and authority with the focus on the priestess, but as you mentioned, James, it's really powerful that we knew the artist's name. It was meaningful to attribute to a work to a specific person, unlike many of the other objects in the African gallery.
It is indeed a rare gift to have the name of a historic African artist. And in essence, the goal of this 4-year project has been to contextualize this work as best we can, both in terms of Bámigbóyè's biography and his development as an artist over a 50-year period, but also in terms of a broader Yoruba aesthetic, as seen specifically through the lens of his own work. Can we change the slide, please? So context is everything here. As you enter the space, you turn to your right and are greeted with a map and a timeline. While we may regularly think of Johannesburg, especially for your research, Afi, Lagos, New York, Paris as cultural capitals, I ask visitors on entering the exhibition to shift their center of gravity to Kajola in Kwara State, Nigeria, home of the Bámigbóyè family and the descendants of Moshood Olosoma Bámigbóyè, who died in 1975. The map outlines the vast Yoruba cultural region and lists the various Yoruba subgroups. As you can see, Kajola sits between the Igbomina and the Ekiti subgroup of the Yoruba peoples. The artist's family identify as Ekiti and speak the Ekiti dialect of the Yoruba language. The region is considered part of northeastern Yoruba land and is located in western Nigeria in present-day Kwara State. I want to just emphasize that the artist grew up in a world that looked towards the north to Ilorin, capital of the Ilorin Emirate, the southernmost extension of the Sokoto Caliphate by the early 19th century. And Ilorin was very much a capital city from the perspective of Kajola. During the Yoruba civil wars later in the 19th century, Kajola found itself caught between Ilorin to the north and Ibadan to the south, who battled for control of this region. You will see on the map too Ile-Ife, which is located 60 miles southwest of Kajola in present-day Osun State. According to oral history, Kajola was settled in the 12th century when its founding families traveled there from the ancient Yoruba city-state of Ile-Ife, considered by the Yoruba to be the, quote, cosmographic locus of all civilization. The first ruler, Edamara of Kajola, carried with him crowns from Ile-Ife, which displayed his right to rule, and Bámigbóyè was a successor of this ruler. Next slide, please. So on the wall next to the map is a timeline, This outlines the major historical events in the wider region and also the key dates in the artist's own life. So you'll notice that broader historical dates and events, such as the date of Nigerian independence on October 1st, 1960, are presented in a silvery grey colour, while dates relevant to the biography of the artist, such as when he became the Edinburgh or ruler of Kujola in 1963, are presented in cream. Right at the beginning of the show, then, the visitor is provided with a very specific place and time, which defines the scope of the exhibition.
I really love your use of maps and the timeline. They're really useful pedagogical tools. They offer the visitor a way to familiarize themselves with the context in which Bámigbóyè made his work. Given that the gallery serves a multi-generational audience, it also helps us who have different understandings of the continent understand and kind of be situated within the social, geographic, and temporal context of this exhibition.
Yes, this intense focus on place and time is incredibly important to the goals of the exhibition, which, as you know, aim to provide a comprehensive review of this single woodcarver's workshop during a time of remarkable change for the people of his town and in Nigeria more broadly. Mm. It also employs works of carving by Bámigbóyè as a means of introducing extraordinary artworks by other artists into the space: textiles, leatherwork, beadwork, the kind of objects that inspired him, that came from the world in which the artist lived and depicts with such precision in his carving. Next slide, please. So importantly then, one of the first objects that a visitor will see is a leather bag dating from the mid-20th century on loan from the British Museum, London. This bag, laba, was an essential part of the equipment of a priest of the Orisha Shango, god of thunder and war, used for storing ritual equipment and worn during festivals over the priest's shoulder. When not in use, it would have been displayed on the wall of a shrine dedicated to Shango. Note how in the 4 panels we see abstract depictions of Eshu, the messenger of the gods. The leatherworker and embroiderer have created an electric, almost jittering sense of motion through pattern and color. We see a figure in profile dancing and also a stylized lightning flash. Mm. Next slide, please. So, as you noted in this work by Bámigbóyè, behind the female figure riding on the horse is a male figure, and Bámigbóyè has depicted this figure as a Shango priest, and we know that this figure is a Shango priest through the leather bag that's strapped around his shoulder. So all of a sudden we see the sculpture in a new light by having these 2 objects in the same space, and realize Bámigbóyè sought to accurately depict the dress and adornment of the people around him so that the sculptures were readily comprehensible to his first audience. Here is a drummer, here is a Shango priest, here is a warrior holding an identifiable contemporary weapon. Next slide, please. So the exhibition is also about changes over time. And so in the same introductory space, we have a games board, Io Olopon, also on loan from the British Museum, which is, as you see, very different in style and function from the gallery shrine figure, and dates from later in his career, probably from the 1960s.
How do you know they were both made by Bámigbóyè?
Yeah, I mean, they're so different, and that's a major question of the show. So we believe that the equestrian figure and the games board are both works by Bámigbóyè through a combination of different sources, through provenance research, extensive provenance research, which has included archival research, both in Nigeria and in the UK. This has been combined with interviews with the artist's family, and also very close stylistic analysis of these works with other works by other Yoruba sculptors. This analysis also builds on the work of previous generations of art historians like Fag and Lamidi Fakaye, as I mentioned before, some of whom actually met with the artist and interviewed him. So in this introductory space, you immediately get a sense of his range as an artist and how his style developed over time, we see themes that are explored in many of his works from the 1920s through to the 1960s. So both these intensely focused figurative carvings and also these beautiful stretches of geometric patterning, such as those which you see in the central panel there. So it's interesting to note that the pattern that you see there was actually called Bata Oloro, sandals of a rich man, by the artist. And it was likely inspired by Islamic leatherworking traditions of the Sokoto Caliphate to the north, the dominant political force in the region. The board would have traditionally been placed on the floor, but one of Bámigbóyè's innovations as a sculptor was to raise the board up on this open work platform. An interesting way in which this piece connects with his biography. So a great deal of what we know about the artist has been recorded in the form of praise songs, oriki, which are published in the catalogue for the first time. These include the artist's personal oriki, also an oriki that was sung while he carved his work oriki, and then a broader oriki in celebration of his town, Kajola. So according to his personal oriki, Bámigbóyè was so talented that he could play a game of Ayo with one hand, and as you know, this is a complicated counting game, while he carved with the other. So I love this piece because it ties into his biography and also teaches us so much about his work. The next slide, please. So looking over the room is a large photographic portrait of the artist taken by British art historian William Bulafag in 1949-1950. Smiling, he's beautifully dressed in a prestige robe, rigor imported from the north and embroidered with the kind of geometric patterning which hugely inspired the artist's own work. Effie, in your contribution to the catalogue, you focus on portraits of Bámigbóyè and the role he played in fashioning his own image.
Yes, this portrait is really beautiful. Like the images I discuss in the catalog, this photograph is striking because you can tell he had an established relationship with the photographer, art historian William Fagg. There are clues in the image that Bámigbóyè consented to having his picture taken. He is directly gazing at the photographer. He wears a smile. He is dressed in a detailed and beautiful robe. Typical of portraiture, it feels intentional and stylized. The creation of the image also alludes to Bámigbóyè's engagement with art markets outside of his local context. I love this image because it also demonstrates the ways that photography helped Bámigbóyè navigate the foreign art market and was part of his way of actively participating in the creation of his own artistic legacy. He used images to reach a wider audience, allowing him, as his personal oriki lyrics state, to send sculptures through airplanes.
And all the way to New Haven. So we move on to the next slide, please. So welcome to the main room of the exhibition. As you can see, the exhibition is designed around this central platform where 7 large-scale epaulet masks by the artist are on display. Dating from the 1920s and 1930s, these masks would have been performed once a year at a festival known locally as Epa, held over the course of about a week, sometime between March and May, once the farmers had planted their crops and tilled the land around them, a time of pause and celebration in the agricultural calendar. They were held in honor of the various spiritual forces necessary to the peaceful and healthy functioning of society. So on this platform are representations of kings, oba, and warriors. Next slide, please. So the vision of our brilliant exhibition designer, Andrew Dauber, the platform evokes the mound upon which a performer must jump, wearing one of these heavy and intricately carved masks at the culmination of the festival. The festival would happen at midday and could include up to 40 masks all performed at once. So this gives a sense of how dramatic this must have been. Bámigbóyè said of one of his own Epa masks depicting the oba or king, in fact, the very one that you can see in this image, which is generously on loan to the exhibition from the New York Museum of Art, Ata for Jowo, which means you can look at it for a complete day. So intricate is the carving. Next slide, please. Atafajor. So this praise name served as the inspiration for how the exhibition was designed, with the idea of giving visitors the ability to see the works fully in the round, and also to get really up close and study the incredible detail that Bámigbóyè was able to include.
What a gift. When bringing in various groups, the platform allows viewers to see the space from different angles. This makes the space feel more inclusive and inviting. Visitors can really take in the multiple dimensions of Bámigbóyè's work.
So yes, the idea is that there's plenty of room for groups to navigate the space and to really spend time with the works. The idea being that once you've come through the introductory gallery and are in the central room, the space entirely opens up. And works displayed at the periphery, like the textiles and the beadwork, speak to the wooden sculpture at the center, so that for the visitor, the experience is cumulative. You've gained something both from looking closely and from looking across the room. And certain shapes like triangles, dots, zigzags, an endless knot motif reappear time and again across Bámigbóyè's work and in different media. Next slide, please. So in this image, you can see a case full of weapons and elaborate riding equipment of the kind that is depicted by the artist in his epimasks of warriors and kings. So you suddenly get a better sense of the visual world around the artist and how varied and complex the Yoruba arts are. Contextual objects displayed around the central platform directly help to bring these wooden carvings to life. Next slide, please. Two epimasks depicting the Aya Beji, the mother with twins, another important theme of the Epa Festival, and really a counterbalance to the more aggressive male forces, are presented back to back in one case at the end of the central platform. And here, albeit through perspex, you get very close to the decorated surface of the wood and begin to truly understand that these are works of art, masterful carvings that are meant to be appreciated from every angle and would have been performed in these busy festivals where people would have seen them from all directions. Next slide, please. So close study also reminds visitors that these masks would have originally been painted each time they were performed. Stored by the artist in the rafters above the fire to protect them from insect damage when not in use, and sometimes dressed in protective clothes. When they were brought out for these annual festivals, they were decorated with bright pigment, hung with fresh raffia, and seen elevated on a dancer's head. So while any traces of the pigment survive, we get a sense of how magnificent these masks must have looked newly painted. Bámigbóyè, as well as being a carver, was also known for the quality of his painting, according to archival sources.
This is really interesting. In some ways, we are asked to use our imaginations to complete the picture. Can you give us a sense of what these might have looked like?
Absolutely. So next slide, please. So as part of the research for this project, I visited the artist's family in Kajola, Kwara State, a number of times, beginning in January 2019. I returned again in August 2019 and then again in February 2020, when Bámigbóyè's family and the Kajola community hosted an Epa Festival in honor of the present exhibition. As you can imagine, it was an amazing experience, which was attended by over 3,000 people and was organized by the Edinburgh of Kajola, the artist's successor in the role, and also by the artist's sons, including Samuel Babatunde Bámigbóyè, who was an apprentice of Bámigbóyè and who continues to carve wood today. And Samuel Babatunde Bámigbóyè was actually in charge of repainting the sculpture. So there was this amazing continuation. And so as part of this experience, we have all this footage, some of which is published in the catalogue. And while I certainly did not want to overwhelm the exhibition with video footage, nor make a false equivalency between a historic work of art in a museum collection and one that is still in use in the community, I wanted visitors to actually see how masks like this would have originally been performed, as this experience had such a profound impact on my own understanding and appreciation of these works. So the image that you're seeing here is as you come around the wall, we have projected footage from the EPA Festival hosted by the artist community for the exhibition.
It's really useful to see the activation of the mass. I understand your concern about blending chronology, but as a viewer, we get a sense of the importance of this tradition since it's still relevant today. Your exhibition has a beautiful way of bringing us into the present through an exploration of the past, which I love.
Thank you. So the vibrancy of this history and the importance of this artist as an ancestor is something that struck me forcefully when visiting his family. And in particular, it was a real surprise to witness the performance of the Oloko mask, which you see here in the footage, and which is the most important of all the EPA masks. An Oloko mask, according to convention, must always show a leopard. But of course, in Bámigbóyè's interpretation, the leopard is shown on the back of an antelope, and is surmounted by a rooster with a python in its mouth. So Bámigbóyè is always trying to do more than can be possibly done within the convention in which he's working. He's always striving to take it to the next level. So Oloko, the deity that's been represented here, is associated with Ogon, the Orisha of iron and war, and so with the tools he makes for hunting and farming. So this is an essential force that must be honored. And in 2019, working closely with colleagues at the National Museum in Lagos, including Mrs. Adeboye, who'll be here next week, and Mrs. Pamela Otuka, we managed to locate an Oloko mask by Bámigbóyè accessioned in 1953 in the storerooms of the National Museum in Lagos. And you can see it on the right here. This is the first time it has been on loan outside of Nigeria. And so behind it is footage from the February 2020 EPA Festival, and you can see the Oloko mask ascending the hill to the ecstatic celebration of the crowd. And in the exhibition, you can actually click on a QR code and hear the sound of the crowd. So close analysis of these two masks, the one owned by the community and this one, and also a third housed at the University of Birmingham, forms the contribution to the catalogue by conservators Anne Gunnison and Kathy Silverman.
You mentioned that this work is Bámigbóyè's interpretation. Did he work alone?
Next slide, please. So, as the title of the exhibition indicates, Bámigbóyè is a master of the Yoruba tradition. So he is a carver practicing within a defined convention and offering his own interpretation, which he refined over many years. So he did not invent any of these forms, but rather through his skill, through his experience, he perfected them and expressed them in his own distinct style. So an area of the display really focuses in on this question of defining Bámigbóyè's style in relation to other sculptors. And my catalogue essay goes into this in greater depth. But here in this display, we have a selection of 9 area Beji figures carved by named carvers from across Yoruba land. These include 3 figures that you see on the left, which represent the Abeokuta School of Carving, 2 works attributed to Bámigbóyè from the collection of the National Museum, Lagos, and 1 figure from the collection of Christopher Evers, which is attributed to Bámigbóyè. So this is really a moment for visitors to see that Bámigbóyè was not alone. He was not a singular genius, but was part of a network of carvers who were aware of and inspired by each other's work, and who were also commissioned to carve the same types of objects.
This is so important. So do we know who taught Bámigbóyè to carve?
We don't. So family lineages were often associated with specific crafts, such as blacksmithing, pottery, weaving, or wood carving. And the family compound might develop a reputation as being a center of specialized production. So skills were passed down from one generation to the next through the form of apprenticeships. Significantly, Bámigbóyè did not come from a family of wood carvers. Like most men in Kajola, his father was a farmer, while his mother helped with the farm work and was also a market trader. Bámigbóyè's family was aristocratic and held positions of political and spiritual authority. As described before, his ancestors carried with them from Ile Ife the crowns of leadership, as well as a shrine dedicated to the divinatory oracle Ifa. So according to his own account and that of his children, he learned to carve from God. His ability to carve and also to heal were a sign of spiritual grace. However, given that he conforms so closely to the Yoruba traditions of carving, and when interviewed as a young man said that it had taken him 10 years to learn how to carve, it is likely that he was apprenticed to an unknown carver. The emphasis really is on what he contributed to the tradition over time through experience and practice, more on what he was taught. And you find this with a number of other carvers. They tend to de-emphasize the person who taught them over what they've contributed through practice. So comparing his work to other sculptors in the region, stylistically, we can say that his work is closely related to that of his neighbor, the sculptor Dada, who is known by the praise name Ariagon Yana, meaning one who gets money with the tools of Ogon and spends it liberally. Ariagon's workshop is about 5 kilometers away from Bámigbóyè's, and it is clear that they both had a strong impact on each other's work. In the exhibition, I include a number of works by Ariagon which show this closeness of style. And one of Ariagon's descendants, Francis Bamidele, served as an advisor on the exhibition. Next slide, please. So as mentioned earlier, Bámigbóyè lived during a period of immense change. He would live through the entire period of British colonial occupation from its formalization in 1900 through to independence in 1960. From around 1933 until 1945, he was employed as a teacher in wood carving at a boarding school in Omo, Iran, established by the British colonial regime for the children of Yoruba farmers in the region surrounding Bámigbóyè's hometown. Effie, in your catalogue essay, you write about this image here on the left. The image is included as part of the exhibition, presented next to a very similar bust to the one that Bámigbóyè is seen holding here. Could you tell us a little bit more about the image?
Of course. So the photograph was taken by Edward Harlan Duckworth, a British expatriate officer and the founding editor of the magazine Nigeria. In the image, Bámigbóyè is wearing a wide sleeve robe layered over a shirt and a hat. His face shows a slight smile and his eyes directly meet the photographer's. Similar to the portrait we discussed earlier, there appears to be a familiarity between Duckworth and Bámigbóyè. The picture seems to have been taken outside. The background is pitch black, save for some leaves that hang above the artist's head. The lighting in the photograph is precise. Bámigbóyè's face is well lit, and the deep textures of the sculpture are visible. The bust provides a glimpse into the artist's practice and is carved in Bámigbóyè's signature style, which you can also see in the sculpture right beside it. Almond-shaped eyes with precise detail work. The portrait by Duckworth is striking and powerful. Again, like you showed earlier, Bámigbóyè is directly looking at the camera and is posed towards the photographer, which to me suggests he consented to having his picture taken. In the archive, you can see an inscription on the back in pencil. The inscription is of his last name and the name of a town. As was common practice until recently, Bámigbóyè, like other African artists of the period, was identified using names of various local towns, such as Owa Oda. The names are usually towns he worked in or near where he lived, rather than by his full name or his actual hometown. Indeed, most of Bámigbóyè's work is in museums in the United Kingdom and the United States are attributed to Bámigbóyè of Oda Owa, a convention established by the British art historian William Fagg. In fact, it is not until this present exhibition and catalog that an institution made use of his full name. Nevertheless, Bámigbóyè remains one of the few named African artists of his time in European and US art museums.
Yeah, the artist's name has been presented in different ways over the years. And today he is remembered by his family as His Royal Majesty Oba Moshood Olusomo Bámigbóyè, M.O.N. Edemiran of Kajola. His name was first written, as you mentioned, as Bámigbóyè in colonial documentation generated in the 1930s, and he's been associated with the names of various large local towns, not only Oda Owa, but also Ilofa and Omo Aran, where from about 1933 to 1945, he taught wood carving. And so that's when this photograph was taken, during this period of his life. Next slide, please. So it's in the 1930s, around the time that he begins teaching at the school in Omo Aran, that depictions of the European figure start to appear in his work. So this post was originally commissioned for the courtyard of the palace of the ruler Elegbe of Ekan. The European figure is shown seated on a folding chair, which over time would be used by rulers throughout Yoruba land as a throne. In his right hand, he holds a pipe to his mouth. In his left, he holds a book. The book and the folding chair replace the horse and the flintlock rifle of the 19th century as the ultimate weapons of the elite. And we can add to this the bicycle, which is depicted elsewhere by the artist. So he's responding to these broader changes in Nigeria. The European seated on the folding chair is himself positioned on top of a Yoruba-style stool. And this is supported by 4 soldiers wearing fezzes and holding weapons. So very much wearing the clothes and holding the objects that are familiar from the world around him. And given the degree to which scale and positioning indicates hierarchy in Yoruba sculpture, but also in the sculpture of the wider region, it's clear who is in charge in this depiction. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, this region came under the control of the Ilorin Emirate, southernmost extension of the Sokoto Caliphate, in the early 19th century. And the Emir of Ilorin continues to be regarded as one of the major figures of traditional authority in Kajola through to the present day. In the 1960s, following Nigerian independence, and at the direct invitation of the Emir of Ilorin, Bámigbóyè converted to Islam, and this is reflected in his sculpture of later in his career, with its intense focus on geometric patterning. This was also when he took the name Moshood. So in the exhibition, I highlight this aspect of his work through the inclusion of the kinds of prestige robes that he himself would have worn, along with 2 stools by the artist, which have tops richly decorated with patterns and likely inspired by Nupe stools from the north. As his son points out, however, even though he converted to Islam as the ruler of Kajola, he still welcomed Christians into his home and also those who practiced traditional Yoruba religion. And he continued to be a herbalist, to practice traditional medicine.
This is so important. In the exhibition, we get a sense of how transnational, local, and national forces impacted a single individual's artistic practice. Through this 50-year period, we see how faith, place, status, age, and politics impacted how Bámigbóyè imagined and depicted the world around him.
Absolutely. Next slide, please. So before opening our discussion here to questions from the audience, I just wanted to end on this image, which I absolutely love and which was shared with me by the family. So in this image, you can see Bámigbóyè at center. It dates from 1967, and you can see him surrounded by all of his people. He wears this silver or gold piece of cloth, which he had been given by the Emir of Ilorin himself. So Bámigbóyè's praise song actually celebrates the fact that he was known for wearing beautiful Ashoke cloth of the kind on display in the exhibition. And a leitmotif of the exhibition is a display of the finest examples of Yoruba weaving. As you can see, Bámigbóyè is surrounded by all his people, warriors, police officers, wives, and children holding fans, musical instruments, weapons. Seeing this image is like seeing an epimass come to life, and it makes you realize that as a wood carver, he was essentially a photographer of his age, a documentarian, accurately recording historical events. the American professor and anthropologist John Pemberton III, who met the artist in 1971, characterized Bámigbóyè as the paramount historian and storyteller of his community, whose monumental sculptures served as visual ariki, oral histories given material form. Effie, given your contribution, your beautiful contribution to the catalogue, I would really love to hear how you respond to this image.
Thank you, James. This image to me is really tender. The photograph is of an elder, as you said, surrounded by his community. Given that he has now passed, there's something nostalgic about it. On the slide, we see a photograph of a photograph. It reminds me of the way we sometimes encounter a picture in a family member's home, and we pause and we capture it to keep it with us. It looks like it's resting on someone's lap. It's also in black and white, evocative of the past, but it's also an image deliberately announcing its own significance. At the bottom, there's an inscription, not of names, but of titles, letting us know not who each person is, but what they do and their relationship to each other. The image is about community. All their titles are relational: police officer, princess, children, wives, etc.
So this is the image is actually resting on my lap in the artist's home, and it just reminds us that so much of what we know about the artist has been shared with us by his family, who, as you indicate, reveal that Bámigbóyè was this multifaceted man. He was a herbalist. He was the Edinburgh or ruler of Kajola, so he was a king. He was a judge on a local court. He was also husband to 12 women and the father of 26 children. And he's remembered by his descendants, above all, perhaps, for his love of family, his kindness, and his generosity of spirit. I am particularly grateful to Bámigbóyè's son, Abdulaziz Olatoye Bámigbóyè, who served as family representative, and to Samuel Babatunde Bámigbóyè, who were both generous with their knowledge. The contributions of the family are included in the catalogue, and excerpts from some of the interviews conducted with 3 of the artist's sons are presented on a screen in the exhibition, so visitors can hear the artist described by his own family. As noted, these excerpts include a recitation of the artist's praise song, or ariki, which is also published in the catalogue for the first time, with a lyrical introduction to the oral poetry form by Olusegun Adesola, senior lecturer in Yoruba and African Studies at Yale. So now for some questions from the audience, if we could move forward to the next slide.
Wonderful. Our first question is, what's next for you, James, after this wonderful presentation and exhibition?
So yes, this has been a 4-year project. And in museums, projects move much slower than in any other field in the world. We move in a sort of geological time. And so the next project is scheduled for 2027. Ooh. And it's going to look at the African collections at Yale University more broadly. So thinking about how these objects ended up at the university, and what kind of portrait of the African continent they convey. So it's really going to be a chance to think more broadly about the collections at Yale after this incredibly focused experience.
Wonderful. So, comparing to your next project to this project, what is the advantage of focusing solely on one carver, one sculptor, one artist's practice?
Yeah, well, I think that what has been so extraordinary is the fact that this is simply an art exhibition in an art museum on some level. So this is the kind of work that is done regularly for artists from Western traditions, and it has been done so few times for African artists. And that's because we don't have this gift of the knowledge of the identity of the artist. And so with this knowledge, I think the exhibition and the experience of doing the research just demonstrates how deep you can go, and what a complex portrait you can paint. So the work of Bámigbóyè was this lens for revealing this broader history. But any work of art in the collection could do this if you knew who the artist was. And we actually have the work of about 70 identified historic African artists in the collection.
Mm.
And so, you know, the potential for this research could be replicated with other artists. And I feel a university museum is really the ideal place to do this kind of focused research. Last spring, I had the pleasure of teaching an undergrad seminar entitled "The Artist in African Art," which took this idea of the individual artist as a way of being more specific about African art, avoiding mass generalizations.
And we see that specificity with your map. You locate us in a specific place at a specific time, and with your timeline, it's a way of like focusing in this really beautiful way. So we are aware that we're getting a snapshot instead of this longer kind of generalized history. It's really powerful what you're doing with this space. I'm wondering, you know, you're very deliberate about the font, and in conversation with the wonderful team at the Yale University Art Gallery, you know, why the darkness, you know, what were some curatorial choices that you were making in terms of like the darker background and all of that to help kind of animate the space in a specific way?
Yes, so in this image, you can see that we've used this color. It's a very beautiful color. It's gray in some lights, black in others. It's a dark blue. It reminds me a little bit of a chalkboard, like you're really going to come in and learn something. And it's just a great backdrop for wooden sculpture and for textiles and for beadwork. And it's similar to a color that I've used in the permanent display downstairs. What I've tried to do, though, is as much as possible keep the lights up. So it's as bright as it can be in here. And with these sculptures, we aimed, working with Alicia, who's incredibly talented, we aimed to light these from above, so that you get a sense of how they would have been performed in the midday with the sun beating down on them. But the color is just a great backdrop, and it means that the objects themselves are the ones that sing. So you can see here all of these pigments. You know, you get a sense of this cream color in the face of the horse here, which is also reflected in the textiles behind. You can see a little bit there, the feathers, the ostrich feathers on the fans. You have these visual links for me. Behind the platform, you can see this really exquisite magenta color of this textile, which the gallery recently acquired. So the colors are coming from the objects and shaping the aesthetic world that you're introduced to as you walk through the show.
Yeah, this is really wonderful. It made me also think of when you were describing the storage, I imagined it being a bit of a darker space too. So I didn't know if it came from some of the ways in which these objects would have lived outside of, you know, the gallery space. And then the way that you use platforms to kind of mimic pardon me, some of the ways we would interact with this if it was being animated outside of the gallery space is quite powerful. But we have one question about how much effort is put into provenance that actually verifiable and documented?
So yeah, that's a great question. And it's a question that is central to the practice of any art historian. And especially to curators who are the representatives of African art collections. So provenance research, for everyone who knows, it's the tracing of the ownership of a work from the moment of its creation through to its moment of display or housing in its current context. So it's a very important art historical tool. It allows us to understand how this work was appreciated over time, who owned it and how it was valued, and different information that was attached to it at different moments in its history. And it's also incredibly important from a legal and ethical point of view, because we can uncover if there are any chains in the break of ownership. And so with Bámigbóyè's sculpture, the majority of the works were sold directly by the artist during his lifetime, and we can trace it back to his workshop. So, for instance, the one we're looking at here was documented in the 1960s in his workshop, and there are actually archival images of this work which show it with different pigmentation. So finding historical images of these works have also shown us how they were decorated differently over time. So you get a sense of the change. So this one was documented in the 60s and then sold by the artist. So we can identify them to Bámigbóyè's workshop through this chain of ownership. There are a few examples where the works are attributed to him by stylistic comparison to other works. So Bámigbóyè has a very distinct style, and they have been attributed to him by art historians over the last 50 years since his death. And as we discussed during at many moments in our talk, William Bulwer Fagg, who visited the artist in the 1940s, 1950s, was really the first to document his works in situ. And so he was the first scholar of Bámigbóyè's works. And then there have been a number of individuals over the years who focused on him, and who visited his workshop. Malik, if you go back a few slides to the Abeji wall, we can look at this point more closely. Yeah, you just had it. It's one more over. Yeah, here we go. So here we go. So this image, you can actually see at the center. So you count along from the left, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth figure right at the center. This is a work that has been attributed to Bámigbóyè through stylistic comparisons. And what I have been doing is really, asking visitors to look at this wall of figures and say, okay, so which one do you think is by Bámigbóyè? And then you start to notice things like the shape of the eyes, this very sharply cut almond shape is so distinctive of his workshop. You start to notice that the figure has a charm on her chest, and almost all of Bámigbóyè's figures have charms on them, either on their front or their back. And these are inspired by Islamic prototypes. They would have been wrapped in leather. And it just emphasizes that, Bámigbóyè was a healer as well as a sculptor, that these sculptures were intended to promote the health and functioning of society. So often the bodies have charms. And also Bámigbóyè wasn't interested in carving feet or hands. His bodies are often very, very kind of roughed in and rudimentary. The focus is on the face, and you can see, sort of from this image, these very elaborate hairstyles. And so, your eye becomes attuned, and, this is only attributed to, here you can see the eyes here. This is only attributed to Bámigbóyè, but, wait, the veggie wall that we just had. Yeah, so this work is attributed to Bámigbóyè, but, this is really the exhibition is an exercise in art history. You can compare and contrast for yourself. The two figures next to this one were attributed to Bámigbóyè and were acquired by the National Museum in Lagos because of his regional celebrity. So they came from about 40 kilometers away from his workshop. And I would argue, and I argue in the catalogue, that they probably aren't by Bámigbóyè. Wow. So I think, you know, there's room to question and to debate the way in which the names of these master carvers are attached to individual works of art. And another thing to talk about is how a master sculptor would also have apprentices, and individuals might contribute aspects to a piece. So it's not. I strive not to oversimplify it, and to, as much as possible, present Bámigbóyè as one of a number of carvers, but also as an artist who's one of a number of masters in different media. So on the right here, you can see an Abeji figure that's actually encased in this beadwork vest, and this indicates that the figure represents a royal twin. And so here we have the wood carver who would have been commissioned to carve the sculpture, working in collaboration with the leatherwork and the beadworker to create this overall work of art. So Bámigbóyè was part of a network of other carvers, inspired by each other, looking at each other's works. I mean, when you see his work next to Arriaga-Llanas, it's incredible, the similarities. But then you start to see how Bámigbóyè, you know, broke from tradition and really defined his own style.
This is absolutely beautiful and fascinating. We have time for one more question, which is, are there photos of him working? How did he choose the wood? How much do these large masks weigh? And finally, are they one piece of wood?
Yeah, Malik, if we can go to another image of the overall platform. So these would have been, sorry, how much of it? So the wood is, sorry, can we go to another one where you can just see the object? Yeah, great. So yeah, so these are carved from a single piece of wood, if you can believe it. It took Bámigbóyè about 3 or 4 months to carve these. And you can see here around the feet of the horse, you can see how he would have got his hands in to carve. And then slowly he would have refined the piece over time. So essentially you have the horse, you have the rider, and then he's surrounded by up to 40 figures. And it's really, they're miraculous. And they're carved from this wood called Eremodo, which is relatively light, but still at this scale, this is an incredibly heavy thing to wear. And so the performer wears it and holds it on either side, on the ears there. So you can see it has this Janus face at the bottom, which is then held and supported by both hands. And there are images of Bámigbóyè carving, which you write about in your catalogue essay. There are images of his carving knives. He provided the names of different patterns that he used. So because he was so celebrated in his lifetime, there's this really rich archive that surrounds the workshop, which was also a blessing to be able to draw on this. So it was combining all of this archival information, photographs, portraits of him, because he was a sculptor and a king. So he was often photographed with this oral history that really provides the backdrop for this exhibition.
That's it for questions. Thank you, James.
So I just wanted, we're running out of time, but I just wanted to end with a few words of acknowledgement and thanks. I want to just take this opportunity to thank Tiffany Sprague, the Director of Publications and Editorial Services, for her work on the catalogue. Effie, as you know, We worked closely with Tiffany, and we also greatly benefited from the contribution of Dele Jegede, Professor Emeritus Art and Art History at Miami University, Oxford, Ohio, who patiently and meticulously reviewed all Yoruba words for accuracy and contributed a note on the language. As I mentioned at the beginning, so many people have been involved in this exhibition. I wish to just acknowledge curators at other lending institutions who made the travel of these works to New Haven possible, especially colleagues at the British Museum in London and the National Museum in Lagos, where most works by Bámigbóyè are housed. Registrars at those lending institutions who worked with our amazing registrar, Amy Dow, to ensure that the works traveled here safely, and also the couriers who oversaw their safe installation. Conservators at lending institutions, especially those who helped us to better understand the artist's use of pigment, to Anne and Kathy at the gallery, and Nikki at the National Museum in Lagos, to Jason de Block, who helped prepare the Lagos stones to travel here with Mr. Edith. All of these people contributed to this exhibition. And as you'll see from these images, we worked with an extraordinary exhibition team here who worked with such grace and skill to install these objects. I'm grateful to our director, Stephanie Wells, and our chief curator, Larry Cantor, for their support throughout. And this is the first in our series of programming related to Bámigbóyè, overseen by Maureen Theodore and her team, Liz and Malik. And I thank them for their work on this and hope to see everyone at future events. Finally, thank you, Effie, for joining me today and for your contribution to the catalogue. And thank you everyone who found the time to attend today's session. This is truly a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to see all of these works in one place. And so I hope to see you in New Haven soon.